There we go. Okay, we got a couple people joining.
Great. So then likely we have a quorum as well. So let me start reading the script. As a preliminary matter, this is Gary Ballard, Chair of the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. So Kathy, I know you're here, and Peter, you're here, and Mary, you're here, right? Wendy,
Here.
you're here. Wendy's
Here.
mute. And
Here.
Don, good to see
Here.
you here. Thank you, Don. Okay. And anticipated speakers on the agenda. Rob is with us. Good morning, Rob. Nice to have you here. Especially at this quiet time for the Steamship Authority. This open meeting of the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers is being conducted remotely pursuant to the Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, and ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting may feature public comment. For this meeting, the Advisory Committee for Non-Voting Taxpayers is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. Public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda. Before turning to the first item on the agenda, let me cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business. I'll introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, the chair will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor. State your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in conversation with other members, please do so through the chair. And for members of the public, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and acknowledge by and speak through the chair. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. So once again, we're still doing Zoom, so we finished that script, and we have, looks like we have a quorum, so I'll continue on with that. With respect to the agenda, we have a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting.
Move.
Second. All in favor? Let me see your hand. Everybody okay? Don?
Aye.
Thank you, Don. Then Kathy sent around the minutes for the last meeting. Would anyone like to propose a motion to approve those?
Let's move.
Peter, go ahead. Second.
Second.
Okay, thanks, Peter.
I
And
think for some reason I cannot, my video is not working here for some reason. I don't know what it is, but.
okay. And so let's take a vote on the minutes. All in favor? Can I see the hands raised? Yes. Peter,
Aye.
Kathy,
Aye.
Peter, Donald.
Here. Aye.
Okay. All right. So we took care of most of that boilerplate. I'm pleased that Rob Rainey has been able to join us today, especially these are tough times for all the folks who have to deal with the elements of the weather that the whole island is dealing with now. And the Steamship Authority, of course, is right in the middle of it. But the Steamship Authority is in the middle of everything that's important to the island. And we're all really pleased that Rob has provided us a little time this morning to talk to us about the Steamship Authority. Make sure we all understand the charter under which you folks were formed in the first place and how your corporate governance works. And then we'll have some questions. I have some questions and thoughts, and I'm sure other members of the committee have some as well. So with that, And by the way, Rob is also the town's tax assessor. And hopefully we'll have a little time to chat with him a little bit about the increased size numbers of people who are now residing on the island, either full-time or part-time. But for now, we can talk about the Steamship Authority. So Rob, you're on.
Great, thank you. Can everyone hear me? Thank you for having me.
You can.
I'll just give a brief sort of history of the steamship and a little description of what I do, and touch on a few other things, and then I'll take questions and comments and other stuff at the end. So basically, about 100 years ago, the boats that ran to Nantucket were owned by railroads. The railroad companies ran the boat system. They were an extension of the railway system because there were no highways as we know them today, and people traveled by railroad. And then when they got to, in those days, Woods Hole, they would take a boat to Nantucket. That sort of went on for a while. And then after World War II, that began to change because highways were now becoming a part of the American way of life. People were driving around in cars, and railroads sort of switched to running freight and not so much passengers. And the boats kind of were left sort of, operating on their own. Without the railroad ownership, the boat service became less reliable, and schedules were more seasonal because that's when you could make the money. So the competition between whatever various boat lines were operating, sought out the summer revenue and sort of abandoned the year-round service because there was no money to be made at all in the off season, and that's actually still true today. So it got to the point where the island residents were not being served, and the state had to step in to help solve the situation. So they created the first iteration of the Steamship Authority in 1948. And that went on for a while, but by the late 50s, the Steamship Authority was saddled with a lot of debt, and there were frequent work strikes because the union situation and the working situation was just terrible. So the state had to step in again in the late 50s and reorganize the whole thing and came up with pretty much what we see today in 1960. The framers of the Steamship Authority thought that the users of the boat line, basically, the travelers going back and forth, would be the ones who paid for it and would also be the ones who were responsible for the oversight of the authority. The state didn't really want to have anything to do with it, and they felt that the island, between Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, the island people could handle running it and handle, charging fares and doing that. So this model has worked pretty well for the last 6 decades or so. But to be clear, the Steamship Authority is a state agency or a transportation authority. It is not a private company. Nantucket has a 35% vote on the board. So does the Vineyard. The Vineyard also has a 35% vote. So that when the two islands are voting together, which is most often the case, there is a majority, so we tend to get what we want. But the mainland ports of Barnstable, Falmouth, and now New Bedford each have a 10% vote. So they can sometimes, they can't override us, although there is an effort at the State House now to change that. But for the most part, we all get along, and we understand, what needs to happen as far as traveling back and forth. Each board member has a duty not only to the community that they represent and those constituents, but they also have to work together to ensure that the Steamship Authority operates as efficiently as possible, and that has seemed to work. If the boat line runs a deficit in any year, that amount is submitted to the state, and then the state submits it to each town based on their voting percentage. So Nantucket would be responsible for 35% of the debt. This almost happened last year with COVID. However, the state stepped in and offered to pay the deficit for us so that none of the towns were burdened with any unforeseen debt, because COVID was, a unique situation that was out of anyone's control, and the deficits that were being run were not because of a lack of management or budgetary foresight or anything like that. It's just there was no one traveling. The board meets once a month, and we set policies, we set the budget, we set the schedules, and we approve major contracts such as vessel dry docks, terminal repairs, and things like that. At this point in the year, we are well into next year's budget, and we have pretty much set next summer and fall schedules. What else? Oh, despite being a state transportation authority, the steamship does not receive any state or federal subsidies. There are no regular subsidies that help the steamship operate. The steamship can apply for and does receive grants from time to time, but usually they're for specific projects like vessel replacements or I'll talk about this in a second. The Woods Hole terminal is currently being rebuilt, and there have been some grants to help with that. All of the revenue, or 99% of it, comes from fares and parking revenues, and also licensing fees when we license another carrier to operate. Obviously, boats and maintenance and fuel and wages and healthcare and those sort of things never get any cheaper. So our fares will probably always tend to rise just to cover the costs, unless our financing model changes, which hopefully it won't, because there are we wouldn't want any loss of control. So if the state stepped in and started offering subsidies, they may want to have some more say in how things are going. And we would like to keep that to ourselves, because we have the best understanding and knowledge of how things should operate. And I think that's the track record it speaks for itself, basically. So my role, I'm appointed by the Nantucket County Commissioners. It's a 3-year term, so every 3 years this role comes up for appointment. And the job description is basically to represent the interests of Nantucket in all steamship matters. I don't specifically work for the Steamship Authority. I work for the town, the island residents, and anybody who's traveling on the boats. I do have a fiduciary responsibility to the steamship to make sure that it operates in a financially efficient way. But I do not work for the steamship, and I am uncompensated. This is an uncompensated position. It's all I get is the great satisfaction of the occasional compliment, and the rest of it is usually complaints and other headaches, but I am completely uncompensated. Let's see what else. I have little to no say in the day-to-day operations of the Steamship Authority, other than from a general sort of policy perspective. I can help solve daily problems and issues, but only by putting people in contact with somebody who is directly involved, or a manager or something like that who can help them. But I cannot magically create reservations. I cannot bump somebody up a standby line. I cannot uncancel a canceled trip. If you're trying to get somewhere and the boat's canceled, I cannot magically reinstate that. I do ride the boats often. I pay the same fares as everyone else. I wait in standby lines. I sometimes get on boats and sometimes not when I'm in the standby line. I see the dirty restrooms. I experience all the same things that everyone else does. And that is actually part of the function, because that allows me to see things the way everyone else does, and I can hopefully help solve those problems. Current projects, as I mentioned before, the Woods Hole terminal, I don't know if anyone's been there recently, but it is undergoing about an 8 to 10 year reconstruction project. And it's an extremely expensive ongoing, I won't say catastrophe, but it's a major issue. All the slips, there were 3 slips there originally, and there are going to be 3 slips there again now. They've all been rebuilt and reconfigured with new transfer bridges and everything that goes along with that. At this point, we're in probably year 6 or 7, And we're getting close to wrapping up the water side portion of it. And then we're gonna start with the land side portion, which includes a new terminal building, a new parking arrangement, staging for vehicles and buses and trucks and everything else. It's a major, major project. Also coming up, the steamship is currently undergoing a fleet-wide assessment as part of planning for a new vessel. This is usually a multi-year project where we assess what we have now as far as vehicles or needs, what's too old to continue, what works, what doesn't work, and hopefully we come up with a design for a new vessel that not only functions on the Nantucket side but also on the Vineyard side, because they're although we're both islands, their needs are different than ours. They're a lot closer to the mainland, and their travel habits are a lot different than ours. So sometimes the vessels that we share aren't always better for one or the other island. So that's a consideration. Vessels generally have about a 50-year design life. The MV Nantucket, which I'm sure we're all familiar with, is now 48 years old. The MV Eagle, which is primarily the boat on our route, is 35 years old. The newest steamship vessel, the Woods Hole, which is also here this summer, is already 5 years old now. So these things go quick. For COVID-19, as anyone who's traveled recently will know, there is a mask mandate on all public transportation, which includes ferry boats. Concessions are and have been an issue throughout COVID. The steamship does not run its own concession stand. It's contracted out, and the contractor has had a very difficult time staffing concessions, not only from a safety perspective, but just they can't get people that'll do it. So right now on the Eagle, the concession stand is not open. We tried to go with vending machines, but they couldn't fit them through the door of the boat to get them on. So concessions continue to be an issue. We had suspended driver services, which would allow someone to drop their vehicle off at the dock and have the steamship drive it on. That's been reinstated over the summer. That's going well again, but that was a COVID issue. For 2021, we have seen a huge, I'm sure everyone sees it on the roads, a huge number of vehicles and trucks that have come over. And that has exceeded our most recent big year was 2019. And the amount of vehicles and trucks coming over this year has exceeded that by probably about 10% at this point. Passengers have not come back. Most people are either staying in their cars or I don't know how they're getting here, but passenger traffic, walk-ons, and even on the fast boats has not come back to pre-COVID levels yet. But vehicles and trucks which are paying for our service right now are over the top. It's important for everyone to remember that Nantucket is an island. We all sort of forget this from time to time, but boats are a finite resource. They get full, and I get a lot of complaints about the boat's full. Why can't you run another one? That's simply not possible at this point because all the boats are running. And on our route, the time that it takes to go back and forth, there's not enough time in the day to even add another one into the mix at this point. So we're pretty much at the full at capacity. And I don't know what's going to change that, but we're at capacity right now in the summer. So I've got a pop quiz. Does anyone know how the vessel Iano got its name?
Nope.
No.
So Iano was the name of a Native American chief in the Barnstable area of southeastern Massachusetts. And it's actually the same person who named Hyannis. So Hyannis was sort of an English adaptation of Iano. And when the vessel was built, we named it sort of as a nod to Hyannis for putting up with all the stuff that we give them year after year They put up with a lot of our traffic, a lot of our, the overflow from the terminal and that sort of thing. So, and I do have a fun fact. The first steam vessel that offered somewhat regular service to Nantucket was named Eagle, just like our current boat. And it did the New Bedford to Nantucket route during the summer of 1818 in about 8 hours, one way.
Wow.
So, and that vessel, so it lasted it lasted not quite a whole season. And at the time it was deemed an unsuccessful venture and the steamboat would never work and they couldn't make a profit. And they ended up selling at the end of the season, they ended up selling the boat to somebody else. And it was another 20 years before regular steamboats travel started to take hold and eventually developed into what we have today. One question that I get that's one of my favorites from people. What time does the noon boat leave? I get this quite a few times. Quite often.
What color is the long ranger's white horse?
It's,
Right.
it's always funny, but what time does the noon boat leave? So there you go.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much all I have.
Rob, I've been coming to the island for between 30 and 35 years, and this was extremely an enlightening presentation by you because I always think it's a good day. If I learn something during any day, I say, I've had a good day today. My amount of knowledge was increased, and that was very, very interesting, very, very interesting presentation. And so I have a couple of follow-up questions for you, and I'm sure my colleagues have some as well. The first question is, so in terms of your part of the state, the Steamship Authority does it report to the governor? I mean, who is your boss? Who is the boss of the board? To whom does the board report? There's a chairman of the board?
The board does not technically report to anybody else. So the board is in charge. There's a general manager that conducts all the day-to-day business. But we are a state agency, and we do have an annual report that gets submitted to the governor and the state. We do have financial audits and that sort of thing. But there is no one sort of overlooking us other than loosely the state transportation department and the Coast Guard and that sort of thing. But there is no one really that we report to other than our own constituents for the most part and the general manager and his team.
And talking about the finances of the steamship line, on a typical year, say 2018 or 2019, are the revenues greater than the expenses? What has been the practice in the past?
The idea is to be break even. So we budget with a little bit extra for unforeseen issues that always seem to crop up. A boat will break down or, something will happen. Fuel prices will increase over the course of the year, something like that. We budget with about a $5 million cushion. The budget this year is or next year is going to be close to 120 million. And so we have about a $5 million cushion that seems to have worked towards the break-even point over the years. And if there's extra, it doesn't go into somebody's pocket. It goes towards future expenses, repairs, and there are various funds that it goes into. There's a sinking fund, there's a vessel replacement fund, pays down bonds. We have a lot of outstanding bonds right now that I think it's about 75 or 80 million of outstanding bonds that are routinely being paid down. But yeah, it's kind of a complicated financial system, but it's basically supposed to be a nonprofit or break even, enough to cover our costs.
And in a typical year, does that mean when you break even, that Nantucket receives no financial benefit from the steamship lines?
That's correct. No town does. The only benefit that Nantucket or any of the other towns receive is through the embarkation fee, which is something that the town started collecting shortly after 9/11. The federal government came in and said, these, not just the steamship, but other, airlines do it, for instance. And the money is returned to the towns that are affected by the boat operation. And it goes to things like paying additional police, patrols and summer police officers and other things that may impact the community. But other than that, the extra money does not go to the towns.
So what you said was that the current schedule is so full that there is really no ability, even if we could find the funds to afford an additional ferry or two, there is not an opportunity to increase the amount of vehicles that are coming back and forth to the island. Is that correct?
That's more or less correct. Yes, there are only 2 slips in Nantucket and only 2 slips in Hyannis. So that we have 3 boats, 3 big boats running right now. And if you added a 4th one, if there became a problem going back and forth, it would be difficult to find a place to put it. And then if you try to add another one on top of that, it would be impossible. So we're very close to the limit of capacity.
Peter sent around some statistics that I saw the other day showing the amount of passengers that came to Nantucket on the Steamship Authority lines. And I noticed in 2017 and 18, there were very significant amounts, more certainly than 19 and 20. And yet we see a far larger number of people on the island. If you listen to what the water company said, that we could have 90 to 100,000 people on the island. So at some point I was trying to figure out if the amount of people on the Steamship Authority is not growing by leaps and bounds, where are those people coming from? And then I remembered that suddenly there's about 18 different airlines that are now flying. And I guess the additional amount of people that come, that fill out that 100,000 possible total come from, say, the airlines as well. But the question that I really have is that the Steamship Authority is so important to fulfill the needs of the island. And watching what has happened this year with this large number of people on island and the shortages that have evolved, whether it's at the airport for fuel or at the food stores for deliveries or at the lumberyard for deliveries. The question is, our infrastructure is under enormous pressure. And the question is, if the island continues to grow in terms of population, how can those needs be met if there is no further capacity? There was a question that I had that I guess you folks could not make that decision. If I was the czar of the universe and I was making decisions, what I would say is, I'm going to give the Steamship Authority an instruction that says infrastructure is priority, and they get priority over passengers. So that I want to make sure that all the trucks that need to get here, that bring the food and bring the supplies, and yes, it might mean that people coming on their private cars might have to wait a few more days to get the reservations, but I would certainly give priority status to fill our infrastructure needs. Could anyone do that today? Does anyone have that authority today?
Not the way that it's set up now, because it's a public transportation authority, which means we have to give equal access to everybody and everything. There are priorities for food trucks and fuel trucks and that sort of thing, but beyond that, your lumber trucks and your landscaping materials and other things are, the priority is equalized because everyone has to sort of have the same opportunity to, it's like a highway in a sense. Everyone, has the same opportunity to get on the highway. You don't have somebody standing at the on-ramp saying, okay, you've got to wait 3 days before you can go down the road because this guy's got to go ahead of you. That's just the way it is. So yeah, I mean, there are bottlenecks, but it's a lot like, coming over the Sagamore Bridge, for instance, when the traffic is so backed up, everyone's barely crawling. You do get over eventually, but it's, we're sort of a bottleneck right now.
That's a bad, the Sagamore Bridge is a really bad scene sometimes.
Yeah.
But that's quite, so that's really a challenge to the continued growth of the island. How does the infrastructure get what it needs to continue people enjoying and getting the benefit of the island? So my colleagues must have some questions as well. Would anyone, Peter?
Sure. Yeah. On this question that you just posed, Gary, on any way to establish priorities, and apparently there are some priorities. I did look at the automobile traffic data and the truck traffic data, and just did a sort of 10-year comparison. And it looks to me like the number of automobiles carried over the past 10 years, and really ending in 2019, because 2020 is, not a bad year to compare anything to, not a good year to compare anything to. It seems like the number of passenger cars is about the same year over year. It varies very, very slightly. Whereas the number of trucks over that same time has increased by, 21, 22%. Now, of course, defining, one truck is not equal to another truck, and so that's a little bit fudgy. But it seems to me that with the information we got earlier this week, that the population of the island, according to the census, went up 40% over that 10-year period, about the same 10-year period. That the truck volume is really what tells the story, because you have more people year round, day in, day out, who need these things. We know about all the houses being built here, and their lumber and landscaping, all the rest of it. So getting back to your question is, does the authority have the authority to discriminate economically? For example, if you need to have more truck capacity and there's just no more boat capacity, can you raise the price for cars in order to create more truck space, that sort of thing? And do you do that?
That is something that we do monitor for every year. In fact, we internally have a report that's called the cost of service analysis, and it basically breaks down that exact thing that you're talking about. And it describes, how much it costs to bring a vehicle over, how much of that cost the fare is paying. And it's different, obviously, for cars and for trucks, because a truck really takes up 5 car spaces, or whatever the number is, depending on the size of the truck. And there is an analysis that does that. And one of the considerations when we're looking at fares is, that very thing is, do we raise the car rate to sort of, offset, or do we, is it covering the cost of service? Are the islanders getting a break or too much of a break? That sort of thing. But yeah, we definitely do that. The balance does shift a little bit from time to time, but yeah, to your point, I mean, the cars have been steady for 10 or so or more years. And, everyone complains about how many more cars there always seems to be every year. And I think part of that is people are coming, they're leaving their vehicle here. And then the next year, the same numbers of cars are coming, but there's already vehicles here. So yeah, we do look at that, yes.
Yeah. I think you're absolutely right about, 10 years ago, I had 0 cars here. Now I've got 2 cars here. And I think some of the others on the line are the same. And in part, it's just, the pleasures of dealing with the steamship. And that's not a criticism. It's just, it's a barrier.
Yeah, no, it's a challenge. And it's certainly, over the years has become more so as it's become busier and busier. There are people that are booking reservations in January for August, and in some cases it's sold out and they can't get it. So yeah, I hear you.
But it's back to this, I guess, concern that I guess Gary was expressing, is the lifeline concern that is there, looking down the road. It seems to me there are two challenges. One, which I did not see addressed at all in the annual report, and I just skimmed through that, and that is climate change and the effect of climate change on the terminals. Because it seems to me that there may have to, where will the boat come in Nantucket if the worst predictions prove to be correct? Will there even be a need for a boat in Nantucket if the worst predictions prove to be correct? But are you all, normally you'd expect maybe at this point, I don't know how many years ahead, this could be a material change, and you'd normally expect to see that in financial reporting in some way, in a note or something. And I didn't see any of it here. But in looking at that, then maybe one also needs to look at the third slip issue, or that sort of thing, because it sounds like it's not just boats, it's slips, which is typical.
Yeah, so the Woods Hole terminal that we're rebuilding, that sea level rise and climate change was certainly considered in that, and is still being considered. When we first did the design, 6 or 7 or more years ago, the state said you have to raise the terminal building up 13 feet from where it is now, and build up the site so that the building is 13 feet higher. That presented all kinds of challenges. And the people around the terminal all came out and complained and said, now we can't see the water because you've got this building in the way. And it was the state saying, you have to do this. We did get a waiver to bring it down a little bit, but it's still easily 10 feet, the bottom floor is 10 feet higher than what it was before. One of the problems we have on Nantucket is right now the terminal is probably about 3 feet or so higher than the roads that lead to it. So in severe, like when Easy Street is flooded during a severe high tide or even a storm, you can't get to the terminal, but the terminal itself is high and dry. And that's going to be an issue going forward. So the steamship may be able to plan to raise the terminal, but the roads and the infrastructure around it have to come up too.
Yeah.
So and then it becomes, okay, well, who's paying for that? So is it the steamship's responsibility to help pay for the roads around it to raise those up so that people can get off the boat? Is it the town? I mean, obviously someone's going to have to pay for it. It's not going to be cheap. And, so these are definitely issues that are certainly coming out now and going forward and are part of the planning process.
Thanks.
I'm on the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee, Rob, and we are in fact, and our consultants, Arcadis, are in fact looking at a potential recommendation, which would be to raise the road levels in many parts of the downtown area, especially near where the ferries are and Easy Street and stuff like that, because when we look at the projections for even 2030, there's going to be too much water constantly flowing in the streets. So it's likely that the report won't come out until the end of September, but it's likely that it will be recommending significant road raises in the downtown area, which would also affect the ferry as well.
Yeah, because when you think about it, if the boat's tied up to the dock and the water is higher, the dock's not going up and down with the water. So the dock's going to have to be, if the sea level is coming up 3 feet, the dock's going to have to go up 3 feet too, just so the boat doesn't, at high tide go over the dock. You know what I mean? So it's a challenge. And then how far inland do you go? If you raise one road, is that enough? How much time does that buy you? Do you have to go in, a block and more inland to raise that road too? It's going to be interesting.
Rob, who regulates the High Line?
The Highline is a private company. They're regulated mostly by the Coast Guard, just like the steamship is. They cross federal waters. In the middle of Nantucket Sound is a little sort of triangle of federal space that's outside of the state limit. So because they cross that just like we do, the Coast Guard has jurisdiction over the Highline. But beyond that, they're a private company and they pretty much do what they want. We do work closely with them as far as scheduling and that sort of thing. They'd have a license from the steamship to operate what they do. So, the steamship sort of oversees that they're following what their license says, but beyond that, we don't have any regulatory, input on what they do. That's up to them.
Yeah,
Ray, I have a question when you have a chance.
go ahead, Peter.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for coming. We appreciate your time.
Sure.
A couple questions. First, maybe it's just my imagination, but it seems like there have been more accidents recently. Am I wrong in that? And if so, and even if not, what's the problem been lately on this?
I think it's because we're so busy, and if there's one accident, it seems like, wow, there's a lot, because previously we weren't as busy, so there weren't as many boats going around, so the sort of accidents weren't very common or highly publicized like they are now. But there are little things that happen all the time. I mean, the Eagle, for instance, runs an 18-hour day every day for about 200 plus days a year until it goes into a dry dock. And if you think about driving your car 18 hours a day for 3/4 of the year, something's bound to go wrong. So we've been pretty lucky. The amount of trips that we do and the sort of incidents that happen the percentage is very small.
And a separate question, I understand. And a separate question, I guess, we've noticed on island that our Amazon deliveries are no longer, our prime Amazon deliveries are no longer prime. Are you seeing, is this being caused by the delay in the amount of truck traffic? The amount of truck traffic, is there any correlation at all?
I don't think so, because those freight shippers, those truck reservations are booked now for next summer. They're booked even before the cars get booked in January. We have a bulk reservation system which goes out to mostly frequent shippers that like the Cape Cod Express, the UPS, all those guys who are bringing those things over. So they already have their reservations or are in the process of getting their reservations for next summer. And for the most part, those don't change from year to year. So I can't explain that.
Just could
Maybe
be.
just be the straight volume. That maybe.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So are there any other questions regarding the Steamship Authority before I ask Rob a couple of questions about the tax basis?
Yeah.
I don't
I
hear
just-
any.
This is Kathy.
Go ahead,
Just-
Kathy.
Just want to say one thing. I'd always assumed that the INO was Hyannis, but I had nobody ever confirmed that. So thank you so much, because I thought that's got to be it. It's just an Anglican, because the English language messing up the word. I just want to say one thing, and is that I know how old the Eagle is because my son took his first steps on the Eagle, which I think is an odd thing because it's a boat and it moves. But literally, when he walked along on the boat, as he was ready to tip over, the boat would kind of catch him, because it was rocking. And that's how he did. So he's actually the wine director at the Nautilus and the Gaslight. So if you ever go in there for dinner, you can mention that to him. Embarrassed him greatly. So.
Yeah, I have just one further question. Just curiosity about what is the thought about the design of the new boat? Bigger, or what is or it's just going to look like one of the old boats?
Well, one of the reasons why they are sort of similar in design, even though they've been done over different years and different boat yards, is there's a limit on how big it can be. Because the bigger you get, the deeper the boat is.
Yeah.
For one. Also in Hyannis, the Eagle is about 235 feet. And if you're on there watching them back out of that slip, there is not much room. And I'm kind of surprised that thing doesn't hit the ground or do something, because there is not a lot of room to maneuver that thing around. So there's a limit on the size. And, and also, if you go too tall, then the boat starts to, rock around too much. So we're kind of stuck with the sort of general dimensions. I mean, it could probably be a little bit wider maybe, or tiny bit longer or taller, but not much. So, I mean, the general design, and of course we have to put these out to bid. So sometimes we get different shipyards that are bidding on it. And so that's why they look a little bit different, or, they act a little bit different, but it's, I mean, the general design we're sort of stuck with.
Yeah. So I guess it can be mostly a ship with drastically new technology, maybe different propulsion. I don't know. Yeah.
That's a good point. So that technology is coming out, or being developed, where there's a hybrid technology now where you can have sort of it runs on batteries when it's in the harbor, or even further out, and then it's a diesel engine in the middle, and then the batteries come back on the other side. So there's a sort of a hybrid model. There's also an all-electric ferries that are coming out. But some of those, it's not proven enough for our route here, because our route might be too long. And then of course, you're going to have to charge it, and that infrastructure is not in place, obviously. So that could be a ways off, but that's certainly something we're looking at.
Yeah.
Thanks. So let's just talk about now your other role as the tax assessor for the town. So now we have a huge population. You and I chatted a year or so ago, and we were talking about, since we are the advisory committee for the non-voting taxpayers, and we pay most of the real estate taxes. In the old days, you and I were talking about 9,000 or 9,500 tax bills going out, and a certain portion to the residents, and the rest to us. But I saw something in the newspaper, yesterday's paper, or Thursday's paper, from Tucker Holland, and he said there's now, he mentioned a figure like 11,500 homes on the island. What's your current thinking now that we have this extended population? So many more people have come to the island and become owners, and a lot of the land that used to be land is now slowly transforming itself into homes. Are those statistics going to change a lot, or will we get?
These numbers are very difficult to tease out of what we have, because when I said 9,500, that's probably about 9,500 residential properties. So that doesn't mean 9,500 houses. So because a lot of properties on Nantucket have they have two houses, for instance. They'll have a main house and a cottage, and that's not included in that number. So that may be where Tucker Holland gets his 10 or 11,000 or whatever he gets. He may be counting it a little bit differently, but from my perspective, we don't really care who's living there. We're going to tax you for what's on your property. So it's really difficult for me to come up with some of those numbers, because it doesn't matter to me if anyone's living there. If there's a house there, it's going to be taxed. Because that's my job, and that's what I'm supposed to do. So, I don't track that. And it doesn't really matter to me, quite frankly, whether there's someone living there or not. So we're all, I can count houses, but even on properties with multiple houses, sometimes it takes somebody going out there to make sure that, first of all, our data is correct, because it could show a house and a cottage and maybe another unit, but maybe they tore it down and never pulled a permit and we didn't know about it. So maybe our number's not right. So it's a very difficult number to get to. But I don't know what the water company's number means either, because I think that's high. I don't think there's 100,000 people here. There's probably somewhere between 50 and 75, but I don't think it's up near 100. But those numbers are really tough to get to.
Yes, but the fact that the value of the real estate on the island generally has been going up like crazy, of course, in the last couple of years, is that going to help the town a bit, or does our mill rate go down when, so we end up collecting the same amount, we just have a lower mill rate? We don't really,
That's pretty much right. And that's pretty much right. So usually when the values go up, the mill rate goes down, or vice versa. If the values go down, the mill rate goes up, because the amount of money that the town needs to collect is a set figure. Last year, it was about 89 million or so from tax revenue. This coming year, fiscal 22, I don't think has been set yet, but it's probably going to be around 90 or 91 million. And so that number is set, and with a higher value, obviously people are going to be paying a little bit less in mill rate to get to that number.
How often do you reassess? What is there a regular reassessment time?
It depends on what your definition is. So the state requires us to do a full revaluation every 5 years. And what that means is we visit every single property on the island and we check it to make sure that our data is correct. And the state certifies that process, and they go through everything that we do and scrutinize it and ultimately certify it to make sure that we're in compliance with Department of Revenue regulations and everything else. In the meantime, between that 5-year reval, we do what's called an interim year adjustment, because we have to stay up with what the market is doing. Because if we waited 5 years, if you got a tax bill from me today and I waited 5 years to tell you what the new number is, you're going to be pretty shocked when you get your tax bill if nothing changes between now and 5 years, and then all of a sudden, boom, you've got this huge bill. So we adjust in an interim year adjustment, which is sanctioned by the Department of Revenue every year, just to keep up with the market, whether it's going up or down. But having said that, our number when it comes out in January is about a year old, just because that's the way our process works.
2 quick follow-ups, Rob. First, what is the valuation 100% to value, or is it it's supposed to be 100% to value? Okay.
It's technically supposed to be 100% of market value.
Got it. And do you have the staff? I mean, do you have the how big a staff do you have to actually go to these homes? And I take it people don't want to let you. I mean, you have no authority to come into the home, do you?
Well, yes and no. There are people that refuse to let us on their parcel and say, please, no, we don't want you here. We don't want you coming in our house. We don't want you looking around the backyard. And I'll often say, well, that's fine. So I'll just guess. I'll guess how big it is. I'll guess how many, pools you have in the backyard. And then they say, oh, well, okay, wait a minute. Sure, you can come look. But no, there are people that won't let us, and we don't have the authority just to, walk into your house. We have to have permission. But having said that, we need to also know what's there so we can, to your benefit too, so we can tax you properly.
Right. And how big a staff do you have? That must take a lot of time. How big a staff do you have?
It does. So usually we have a 4 to 5 person staff. And then in these big revaluations, we have outside contractors that will come in and actually help us drive around the island and go to properties.
And one final question. Where are we in the 5? Is it a 5-year floating, or constantly turning over, or is it 1 5-year for everybody?
Prior to 2019, it was every 3 years. And then in 2019, the state sort of said, well, no, now we're going to do it every 5. So our next one is in 2024. Okay. But right now we're just trying to keep up with the market. And as you can probably imagine, it's very difficult with these crazy numbers that people are paying for things. I'll see a new listing for a property for sale. It'll come out and I'll look at it and say, laugh and say, that is impossible. There is no way someone's going to pay that for that house. And then a week later, it sold for more than what was being asked for. And it's insane.
Do you also use building permits and things like that to inform yourselves?
Yeah. Yes, we get building permits directly from the building department, which allows us to go out and obviously see when someone's built a new house or added something to their property. And that absolutely helps us, keep our data correct and make sure that you're not fudging something for us.
Yeah, and I might say from personal experience, your department, and this was maybe 10 years ago or more, that it's incumbent on us to actually look at what data you have in there. And I noticed that I had, according to your data, one more bathroom than I actually had. And I just called somebody up and said, hey, and they said, oh, thank you. And that was that. And I was very appreciative of, I couldn't imagine that happening anyplace else in the world.
That's a good point, because in the state of Massachusetts, most of the burden for things like that is on the taxpayer. So it is up to the taxpayer to make sure that the assessor has the information for your property correct. And if you don't, and you get a tax bill that is based on something that's not right, then that's kind of your fault, the way the Department of Revenue sees it. So, I mean, there are, like in your case, there are absolutely ways to correct it. And we certainly welcome that, because we don't want to be wrong. But yeah, there's a big burden placed on the taxpayer.
Okay.
Bill,
Here.
did you have a question? Yes, Bill.
Yes, please. Thank you for coming, Rob. I appreciate it. From what I hear of this conversation, I get the impression that you may be losing money because properties aren't valued where they are, where they should be. And maybe the corollary to that is, it seems to me, you're probably losing a lot of money because you can't keep up with the current prices. And I wonder if those propositions are true. And last, I wonder whether or how much cheating you feel there is. How much money's left on the table? I mean, every assessor feels they've left something on the table. It's just a question of how much.
That is partially true in any year. So yes, this year we may be a little bit behind, but we catch up next year. So it's a rolling process. So there may be, we may be a little bit low on you this year, but we'll catch up to you next year and it'll balance out. So, the state sort of feels like whatever money is being left on the table at this point, we'll capture going forward, and that'll be that.
But I don't think you're leaving any money on the table any year. What really is happening, if we depend on your assessments to be as accurate as possible, because it's an equalization issue. And so if you have me underassessed and Bill Gardner overassessed, that means he's paying some of my tax burden and vice versa. And so I don't think it's a matter of leaving any money on the table. It's a matter of how the pie is carved up.
Most people don't look at it that way, but you're absolutely correct. It's a pie of money that we have to collect, and everyone gets based on value. Everyone has their share. So the larger your value is, the larger your share. And to your point, yes, some people may be overvalued and some people may be undervalued. It's an imperfect system, but it's the system that we have. And, we try to make it as accurate as possible, but yeah, sure, that sometimes that happens.
When Bill mentioned people trying to cheat on taxes, reminds me of a funny story I heard several years ago, relating to the island, to Greece, country of Greece, where nobody pays taxes. They all have their own businesses. They don't declare anything, and nobody paid any real estate taxes. So what the authorities decided to do is, with helicopters, they went around and they started taxing homes based on the fact that they had all these swimming pools. Now, that wouldn't have happened in Nantucket very often, but today when I see all the applications before the HDC for swimming pools, it may become another weapon that the tax assessor uses to look at valuations.
So swimming pools, that's an interesting one. When my family moved to Nantucket in the late 70s, there were less than 10 swimming pools on the entire island. Now there are about 1,000. So in 40 plus years, we have now 1,000 swimming pools on the island.
It is a striking change from what was in the past. Any other questions that you folks have on our committee? If not, I want to tell you, Rob, that you are a terrific example of a great public servant for the island of Nantucket. In both of your roles, you play very important parts of the success of this island. So on behalf of myself and our committee and all of the seasonal folks, We really appreciate your terrific efforts, and I thank you for appearing before us this morning and contributing to our wealth of knowledge. Thank you so much.
Here, here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, so that was the other item that we had on the agenda. We have as at our next meeting, we are having as our guest the new legislative representative of our island, who was dealing with the state legislature. And as you know, Peter's been working on a plan to try to get our legislators to find a way for our committee to continue meeting off season virtually. Up until the pandemic, we couldn't do it. With respect to the pandemic, we're okay, and we're now okay until April. But at the end of April, the emergency orders go off, assuming that the pandemic will finally go away. And so that'll be the subject of our next meeting. Just looking at some of the other.
Before, Gary? Is that
Pardon me?
September before the next meeting?
Yes, September 4. And incidentally, let me just mention one thing. On the list is of our possible subjects is talking about the findings of the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee. As you know, I'm our representative on that committee, and the committee's been meeting. We're meeting a lot these days, every Tuesday practically. And there is a draft report. The final report and recommendations is not planned to be issued until the end of September. And that'll be both a report island-wide, including a separate report. The consultants, the firm Arcadis, that had the assignment from the town of Nantucket to do the coastal resiliency study for the whole island, also was separately selected to look at the situation on Baxter Road in Sconset, the situation that is being heavily litigated right now. And so we're kind of looking at that, our committee's looking at that as well. And that the conclusions of the consultant will come out at the end of September as well. But at the last meeting that we had, our consultants, this firm Arcadis, which is an excellent consulting firm. It's a Dutch firm. It's a gigantic global firm, and they do studies of all the harbors. They were the firm that ended up advising the country of Holland to put in these big gates in the harbor to prevent flooding of The Hague. They also did the study for Boston, Massachusetts. They're working on Miami, stuff like that. So they're a very excellent firm. Anyway, there was a presentation that was a preliminary presentation that they gave to our committee, and it's on the website. And in that particular presentation, there were a handful of what they call scenarios of what their recommendations might be. So they haven't come up with any preferred yet, but there were 2 or 3 choices and suggestions, including raising roads in Brant Point and moving houses in Matticat, stuff like that. If you would like, I can send members of all of you, members of our committee, a copy of this interim report. It's not a final report, but if you're interested in that, I will send you the link, because it is on the town website anyway, so anyone in theory has access to it. But you might want to glance through it and see what their current thinking is. They haven't come up with the final recommendations yet, but they have some scenarios in there of what they might want to do. Are you folks interested in that? Should I send that around?
Yes,
Okay.
please.
I shall.
Gary, one question, and I suspect I know the answer, but as I understand that there is there are some visuals at the Macy warehouse on Straight Wharf. Is that
Yes.
related in any way to your work, or is that independent?
It's actually a separate group. And the group that is doing the visuals, and they're a pretty good group, they are related to University of Miami, one of the Florida institutions. And it was a student-led group that came up with some of these plans and recommendations. They aren't ours, but they are worth looking at if you, from what I'm told. I haven't been over there myself, but we talked about it the other day, and someone asked the question, is that the same? And they said, well, some of those are the students' ideas of things that we may do. Some of them we may adopt and some we may not, so.
I've been over there and it's
Yes.
worthwhile. I also watched, I think, I don't know what happened under the aegis of Remain Nantucket or one of those sort of non-governmental organizations that keeps looking at things like this. But I think there's also probably a recording of the presentation that they gave back in June, perhaps, at one of the clubs. And it's very informative. But the visuals, I think it's worth going up there and looking at it. And they have like 5 different areas, including Brant Point and the downtown roads, Water Street or whatever it is, and some drawings about the ways in which one could moderate the impacts. And they're none of them are simple, but they're things that have worked elsewhere and are in consideration for other places in the U.S. And these are basically architecture schools at, I think, Miami, at Florida, I think at Yale or Harvard.
Yale is, yeah, Yale's part of it.
Yeah, and I think one other. And it's
I also noticed.
thoughtful work.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
I also noticed that the town is already moving, so to speak. The offices, the town offices. There's been a lot of discussion apparently already about about plans to move town offices to Mid Island. I don't know whether they're getting ahead of the. In a way, this is part of the problem we always see. Sort of, everybody's got a finger in this thing as sort of haphazard and what have you. I don't know. But it just struck me as a little odd that they were getting so far ahead of the commission.
Well, there was a meeting of the select board and its consultants. This is a different group of consultants that were talking about the long-term facilities planning. And the session actually occurred on Thursday of this week. And it's on YouTube now. And it's a very interesting, I'm not sure I know how to send you that link, but it's a very, I watched the presentation. It's about an hour and a half presentation. And basically this group looked at all of the town facilities, all of them, and concluded that except for a handful that would stay downtown, meaning the motor vehicle department, say, and the town clerk, everything else will move up to fairgrounds. And, where the finance department is over on Washington Street, all of that stuff is moving up to fairground. And I was a little surprised because they're basing it on my committee, the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee's information about what's going to happen with the town in 2050.
Right.
2050. Now that's, it's 30 years out or more than that. But and they did make that recommendation. The town hasn't in full adopted it. And I was surprised that there was very little pushback from members of the select board. It was something that it sounded to me like Libby and some of the other folks, have come to the conclusion that's probably the best way to go, because otherwise they're going to have to reconstruct or redo some of the other buildings downtown. And they say, why are we bothering to renovate buildings, office buildings downtown, when at some point, 30 years out, they won't really be user-friendly anymore because of the rising tides in those neighborhoods.
Do they
So,
have enough, I mean, did the YouTube presentation show that there's exactly where these buildings would go? How
yes,
large? it
oh,
would be?
absolutely. They have an exact plan.
Mhm.
They show exactly where they're going to be and they're going to basically add next to where the fire department and the police department are.
Okay.
They're going to move the land use building there, plus where the planning board has been in the past. That's an old building anyway. And they're going to just move it around the corner there and build a brand new building for that. And so it has a list of all of the functions that will now be moved. But whether they're going to move today or in
30 years
5
from now.
years
Yeah.
or 10 years, it's not clear. And they also talked about what do we do with the old firehouse, which is being used now, for temporary facilities, and that crazy building next to the Stop and Shop that is being used for offices temporarily, which also they keep using some of those buildings for affordable housing.
Well,
that's
yeah, excuse me, maybe they ought to also they better have a plan for the intersection of Fairgrounds and Old South Road at the same time. It's bad now. You can imagine what it'll be like then.
Yes,
That's the plan they killed, what, 3 years ago?
I know.
I know, it's crazy. And I know some people have a luncheon cover there. I think it's called Fairgrounds Restaurant.
Yes.
Overcrowded.
We'll never get there. We'll never be able to get there.
But it seems to me it makes sense to move all the stuff out of downtown, even if you didn't have climate change, because certainly during the 3-month season, going out to the fire station is much easier, and park and walk in and do whatever you need to do and come back out than trying to find a parking space downtown and all the rest of it. It makes a lot of sense.
well, you do have to go on that road. You have to go. You have
Yeah.
to go on that road. You have to go up south, right? And that's
Yeah,
pretty heavily. It's the same road you go to the airport on, Peter. So
Yeah. That's true. Very true.
anyway,
Although there's other access, you can come back through from Fairgrounds Restaurant or whatever that road is there across the way and come up the back way or go out. No, there's more access, it seems to me.
Yeah.
But bottom line is they've got a few years to worry about it.
by the way, that study on Thursday, I'll have to find a way to get the website from YouTube because you all want to see it.
Yeah.
The study on Thursday also talked about a complete relocation of the DPW. Right now, the DPW headquarters is on Matticat Road. It's called 188 Matticat Road. And it is just past the
Dump. The dump.
the waste disposal area, right? And so basically what they did is they looked at, according to this plan, they looked at whether they would either rebuild it where it is, at 188 Matticat, or rebuild it in Tom Nevers, right near Kathy's house, or I'm joking about that, but they did Tom Nevers, right? And the third location was the Nobadeer near the playing fields. And the conclusion they came to is that they recommended to build it in Nobadeer. And so, and then once again, they have a whole plan of moving all of the DPW facilities to Nobadeer. That's their recommendation of the choices. And they said basically the Matticat area where they have is, and certainly what we have seen on the Coastal Resiliency Advisory Committee, Matticat is going to have big problems in 30 or 40 years from the rising tides. Going to wipe out all the homes next to the ocean, or they'll all not wipe them out. The homes will all have to be moved. That's in the presentation I'm going to send you. You'll see all those homes in Matticat near the ocean. They're all gone in 2050. They're all gone. They're either moved or gone, but they can't stay. So, I mean, I think it's good that the town talks about long-term planning.
Well, I'm sorry. I mean, the story yesterday in the Thursday, I guess, in the paper actually was a very frightening story. It seemed to me about the DPW and the lack of I mean, it is a mess, it sounds like right now. And, you know, and then the backup on getting work done, there's not enough staff. I mean, it's a serious problem, I think.
We
And it
do
doesn't
have
seem to be getting better.
We do have a serious problem on the island of underemployment. I mean, we can't get people. I don't know if it was in the paper, but somebody mentioned to me that one of the reasons that the DPW is lacking so many people is that a lot of the people quit because they were hired by the people doing local construction. They were getting paid more money, which wouldn't surprise me. I mean, everyone on the island is suffering with a manpower shortage, and hopefully after the pandemic, that will be go back to normal, I hope. Anyway, I don't know if there's any other subjects we want to talk about now or in the future. Every once in a while, I have this brainstorm that we ought to come up with big, bold positions to take, you know, and tell the town that, you know, I'll tell you one of my bold positions that I came up with at 3 o'clock in the morning the other day. You know, if in fact, affordable housing is the #1 issue in the town, and it is a very important issue, and I agree with that. I still don't know why we couldn't find a way to use portions of the land bank land. I'm not talking about their money. I'm just talking about their land. They have so much land, you know, with 50% of the island under conservation, and there's a lot of living areas that are located next to conservation land, land bank land, and to put another 5 or 10 houses there wouldn't change any of the walking tours, wouldn't change any of the parks, you know, and I keep saying, I don't know, you know, and when you talk about touching any of the land bank properties, people go nuts. And I wasn't in favor of diverting all of that revenue that the proposal was at the meeting, but it seems to me if you have one issue that's the most important issue on the island, so let's deal with it. And it should be more important than having a few extra areas of land bank land that is close to existing residential areas. What do you guys think about that?
Gary, the issue seems more complex than I would have thought. I, along with a friend, have undertaken a project to find housing for a young couple who have an 8-year-old and a business on the island, and they're not poor. In any other environment, they would be able to afford housing. And so we're helping them here. And in the course of those efforts, what I'm finding is that while there is a nonprofit organization, nantuckethousing.org, it's not an easy website to crack. And there are several other organizations, but there is no one concentrated inventory of potential places for people to live. And if you talk about purchasing real estate, where I come from in Washington, D.C., you've got a multi-listing, and everybody can go online to see what houses are available where. Well, here on Nantucket, you don't have that. Only real estate agents can go on to their own inclusive or exclusive little website. And you should be able to find out the houses that are in and there are a few that are in the $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 range. And if you can find those, you know, then you're dealing with issues of financing. And a lot of people don't know it, but Cape Cod 5 has a program that helps relatively low income borrowers. And my point in saying all this is that it simply isn't a lack of land to build affordable housing. I think there's housing out there. It's just a labyrinth to go through if you're trying to find it. And if you're working and you got a family and you're unsophisticated, it's not the easiest thing to do.
Bill, I don't think the housing is out there. I mean, when I know a lot of real estate agents and I see presentations all the time. And when they look at the amount of homes that are available in the inventory on Island, we had a presentation by Ed Sanford several weeks ago at our club on real estate in Nantucket. And there were only 2 properties under $1 million, two. So the real estate agents, look, they'll sell anything, and they're bothered as much as everybody else by the fact that there's so little available at those price, under $2 million, very, very little.
I think there's more than they let on. And if you're a real estate agent, you'd rather hustle the $5 million house, and you don't want to spend a whole lot of time on the $800,000 house. And this fits in with the issue we were discussing about the offshore investors coming in and buying
Yep.
all these places.
Yep.
I think that does hurt. the affordable
Absolutely.
housing, Clearly.
Absolutely. The few homes that are for sale, if people can sell it for more money, they'll sell it for more money. I mean, to me, the Covenant Housing Program is a good program because it allows people to build an additional house on their property as long as they promise to keep it, to local residents and within certain limitations, of course. But anyway.
Well, I agree with you, Gary, that, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I think Kathy had her hand up before I had my mouth open.
Go ahead. I'll come in now.
This issue of affordable housing and the land bank, it does seem to me that when you're talking about the environment, people are part of the environment, and something's going to have to give here. I saw one report that perhaps only 9% of the land on the island is still available for development. That is, not a small amount, but it's not a large amount either. And I think, when you look at this population increase of 40%, year-round population increase of 40%, that's where a lot of this pressure that Bill talks about is coming from. And you just need more houses and more houses that are not going to be bought by offshore investors.
Right.
I don't know what the deal is with the land bank. I know this year people tried to chip away at the land bank, and that did not work. Typically in other places, if you want some land bank property, what you do is you trade. There's a desirable place that might be coextensive with places that are already developed, and you buy some land someplace else and you trade the land or whatever. I don't know whether that's done here or even possible.
Kathy, yes.
Couple things. I think that I know that they do swap in some cases now, and I think there was a recent article in the paper about the land bank actually going over to the vineyard, because the vineyard's land bank does do that. They do allocate parts of their land to be used for housing. And so from what I understand, I mean, the article itself may have gotten the land bank kind of off of their chair a little bit to go out and look at things.
Mhm.
It may, even though it didn't pass, because that's what they did. They went over there. I think Act Now actually paid for their airfare. I think Libby went and somebody else went from the town to look at that whole concept of, can there be some sort of partnership there? So there is a precedent, and there's a successful plan in place that they're looking at. So that's a good thing. And then I also heard that when the governor was here for a fundraiser last week, that he mentioned that there's $1 billion coming from the federal government that he is earmarking for housing in the Commonwealth. And so the question is, how do we get a piece of that? How do we make the case? How do we work some kind of maybe partnership or, plan that says, oh, maybe we'll use some of the short-term, that was another thing that didn't pass, the short-term rental tax, using part of it for housing. Maybe that's just something that they could use. They could use the fact that we get that revenue to get a bond that supports housing. I mean, there's a lot of things you can do along those lines. So I think those articles, despite the fact they didn't pass, I think they're getting some activity associated with them. So that's just sharing things I had read or heard about.
Yeah, that's right, Kathy. I read that article too. First, I was shocked that Act Now was part of that group. I didn't
Yeah.
think they had any right to be there, but they may have instituted it.
Well, they paid for it, which I thought, well, I don't know about that.
Yes, I think it was a conflict of interest myself.
Yeah.
But anyway, the good news is that what they learned apparently is that on Martha's Vineyard, it's not so unusual when the land bank there is in the process of acquiring something. They often talk with their affordable housing authorities there, and they make a joint decision. They say, okay, there's going to be 23 acres here that the people are glad to give or donate or sell to the land bank, and the land bank will keep 16 of those 23 acres and pay for it. And Affordable Housing Trust will take 7 of those acres and pay for it. And that means that instead of the entire 23 acres being land bank that can't be used again for housing. So, and I don't know that that's ever happened in Nantucket. You know, when they talked to the land bank about those issues, they said, well, sometimes when people agree to sell us their land, they are selling us their land because they don't want development on it. It was pristine for years, you know, their grandparents' farms or whatever, and they never want to see houses built on it. So in those cases, it might not work. But I imagine there are plenty of instances, or there can be in the future, where that issue isn't the problem, and that maybe when the land bank is thinking of buying something, if a piece of that can also be used for affordable housing, and let the Affordable Housing Trust, you know, put up some money for their piece and let the land bank buy their piece, because just keep adding land bank land that can never be built on, all it's going to do is keep raising prices all over the island, and it's not going to solve the problem we have of all of the locals running around screaming that they can't, you know, they can't find housing. So it's a bigger problem than we can solve in one day, that's for sure. Okay, folks, any other thoughts? Otherwise, our next meeting is for the 4th of September, right? Is that the
Yeah,
date?
yeah, should we be looking into scheduling meetings after that and speakers? Or wait till the next meeting?
I think we should have a meeting once this climate report finally issues.
Okay.
And other, you know, other issues may arise as well. But
Right, so the
Yeah.
climate report will be out, let's say the end of September. So we have our meeting on September 4th, and perhaps our next meeting will be in October, which is our normal schedule would be. Our last meeting would be September 4th, and then we wouldn't meet again till the next June, so.
Yeah, but if we're gonna do, you know, if we're gonna, I mean, it seems to me that we should, you know, cut it back to once a month, you know,
Yep.
in the winter season, and then just get it on a regular schedule, the first Saturday of the month or something, whatever it may
Yep.
be. So we had just go again, so we can get it on our calendars. That's the critical part.
Yeah, I'm thinking about that same, I think that's a good idea in terms of scheduling. So if we meet on September 4, then we might meet again either October 2nd or 9th. By then the crack report will be out, and I probably can get Vince Murphy, who's the Coastal Resiliency coordinator, to attend a meeting. He's always prepared to talk with us about that. So, but I'd like to wait for that report to get out, and we're not sure exactly when it's going to be done, whether it's going to be done the last week of September or the next to last week. But they're required to do that. This is the end of their consultant arrangement with us. So what should we do? Say we'll think about either the 2nd or the 9th probably as the next meeting.
Okay.
Okay, and then we'll find a little more about the report. And then we'll see each other on the 21st anyway, then we can make that final decision. Okay,
Okay.
all right.
Thank you.
Now,
So what did you say? Sorry, Gary, there'll be
we're gonna
another
meet on the
meeting.
21st, and then we'll decide whether, on the
21st?
21st, whether we meet on October 2nd or the 9th.
No, wait. No, we're gonna meet, our next meeting is on the 4th.
I mean,
right?
September 4th, right?
Okay.
September 4th,
That's when we'll decide whether it's gonna be October 2nd or October 9th.
right.
Okay. Okay, and just a quick heads up, if travel is still open, international travel this fall, we'll be gone to the Mediterranean for about 6 weeks. So if any meetings during there, you'll need to have someone else run it.
Oh, wow.
Peter Halley has been excellent, you've trained him
Right.
well. You've trained him well.
Traded well, so just,
But we could also meet in the Mediterranean. Could
Yeah,
we?
that's true.
that's right, that would be fine. Join us.
In the Mediterranean, are you gonna be wet or are you gonna be on land someplace?
Both, yeah. Partly cruise ship. So my husband's 70th birthday was last fall. We had to cancel last fall, so we're hoping we don't have to cancel again.
Yeah.
So
I hope that you,
part cruise, part on our own. Greek
Yeah, I hope-
islands, Greece, Italy, Spain, Portugal.
I'm a glass full kind of guy, but I gotta tell you, this fall does not look promising, certainly in this country. I don't know about the rest of the world.
Yeah,
No.
I was gonna
When
say,
Israel goes down, which it has, I mean,
right,
everywhere else in the Mediterranean is soon to follow, I'm afraid.
yeah. The only good news is there'll be no one on the plane with you, Kathy.
Exactly, yeah. Well, they just took Northern African stops off of the itinerary, so we're not going to Northern Africa. That was supposed to be there, but we'll
Yeah,
see.
Morocco's nice this time of year.
Yes.
And Morocco is on fire right now. Yeah.
Is it? All right, well, good luck. Good luck.
Okay.
Yeah.
Can I have a motion to
So
adjourn?
move, so move.
Second? All in
Second.
favor? Aye. Okay, everyone, stay
Take
safe.
Okay.
Have
Bye.
a good rest of the weekend, and hopefully the hurricane will go past us. You know, we're in Brand Point, and in the last 2 days, our neighborhood has been impassable. You can't go anywhere in our neighborhood because there's nothing but trucks and boat trailers all over, blocking the White Elephant Hotel, blocking all of our streets, pulling these, every boat's getting pulled out of the water, and the storm's gonna go bypass us anyway, probably, so.
And Marine Home has no more flashlights, no more bungee cords, no more tarps. They're out.
Yeah, well, I got my generators last year, so I'm okay, but I don't think we're gonna get it too bad.
No, New York.
Yeah, New York, yeah.
Yeah.
See
Anyway,
everybody.
take care, everybody. Thank you all. Bye-bye.